This is part 4 of Gin and Trouble, The Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 5. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Shedlock and Virginia Rose. Be sure to subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find more of the Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club audiobooks, along with more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.
Chapter 31. Frankie. I broke the surface of the water in a panic. "Dante!" I screamed for him until my voice went raw and screamed some more. In the commotion, I'd lost my life vest. Not the strongest swimmer, I attempted to force myself to calm down and tread the frigid water. When that failed, I laid back and floated among the burning pieces of yacht. It seemed that hours had passed, but that couldn't have been right. I would have succumbed to hypothermia. As it was, I could barely force air into my lungs, and my muscles had stiffened. I don't have much time. So close to death, I thought my life would flash before my eyes, or I'd fight to stay alive or pray for a miracle. But none of that happened. Weirdly, I was pissed. I felt cheated that I'd only just fallen in love, that I hadn't completely set things right with Dante, that we should have had decades together, not weeks or days. Voices and the sputter of an engine echoed across the water, but I couldn't catch my breath to cry for help, nor could I lift my head enough to see anyone nearby. A male called to me over the sound of a motor. Using the last of my strength, I thrashed in the water trying to find the source of the voice. Between the wreckage and the waves, I didn't see the small fishing boat until it nearly ran me over. Before I could make sense of what was happening, someone pulled me out of the water. An older man and a small boy stared down at me as if weighing my odds of survival. The boy nodded and threw a stiff blanket over me. "My friend is missing. Find him." I'd spoken half in English, half in Italian. Not that it mattered. My chattering teeth and raw throat, I'd barely gotten the words out. They replied in a dialect I could barely understand. Please, God, let them speak Sicilian. "Mio marito!" I pointed toward the horizon. While Dante wasn't even my fiancé, I figured husband would carry more weight than friend. They stared with worried expressions. "Mio marito! Dante!" I choked back a sob. "Dante is in the water! Nel mare!" The boy leaped up, pointed, and shouted something in the foreign dialect. The father scanned the water and shook his head, but the kid wouldn't let up. He shouted and whined and pulled on his dad's sleeve. Propping myself upright, I followed the boy's gaze to an orange life vest and what appeared to be a body bobbing in the water. "Dante!" Without thinking, I dove off the boat and paddled in his direction. But when I reached him, I couldn't understand what I saw. Or maybe I didn't want to. Dante's normally olive complexion had paled to a sallow color, and his face had gone slack. I pressed my fingers to his neck, but couldn't find a pulse. Trying again, I pushed harder and thought I felt something. The will to fight that I'd been missing while floating alone roared to life inside me. I would not let him die. "Aiutalo! Help him!" I begged. The old man navigated close enough to grab Dante's right arm, and the boy took his other arm. Together, they managed to pull his lifeless body into the boat. Exhausted and on the brink of hysteria, I grappled for their waiting hands. Once on board, I pressed my cheek against Dante's chest in hopes of hearing his heartbeat. No, he's not breathing. I don't know where I found the strength or the presence of mind to act, but something inside me rose to the surface. Scooting to the edge of the boat, I came up on my knees and gave him 2 rescue breaths. Nothing happened. The old man opened the throttle and sped for the shore, but I feared we were too late. The boy knelt beside me, motioned to Dante, and mimicked chest compressions. Once again, I lifted Dante's chin to open his airway. Pinching his nose, I blew a steady breath into his mouth until his chest rose. Sliding my fingers to his neck, I checked for his pulse again. It was there. Weak, but there. I leaned in to listen and watch for signs of breath. Nothing. The boat lurched, likely propelled forward by a wave, and the boy and I toppled. Once back on my knees, I blew into Dante's mouth again. This time, his stomach distended. "Come on, Dante! Please, don't leave me!" I repositioned his head and prepared to blow again. The contents of his stomach gushed out of his mouth so suddenly I jerked back, nearly flipping the tiny boat. The boy helped me get Dante to his side as he spewed seawater. When he stilled, I noticed the blood oozing from the back of his head. It looked bad. Really bad. But there was nothing else I could do for him. Not until we reached the shore. Even then, he needed a hospital. With the adrenaline wearing off, I became hyper-aware of my own aches and pains, including a rather large gaping gash on my calf. My vision swam and dark spots danced before my eyes. The last thing I remembered was staring at the slick pink muscle inside of my leg and wondering why it wasn't bleeding. Sometime later, I woke in a strange bed. I tried to sit upright, but an elderly man held me down while a woman tended to my wound. "Let me see it." He shook his head and said something to the woman in a hushed tone. Touching his arm to get his attention, I spoke in Sicilian. "Is it bad?" His expression turned more serious as he gripped my shoulders and pinned me down. Before I could protest, the woman poured something over my leg. Pain, unlike anything I'd ever known, tore through my body. I screamed and writhed and begged, but it didn't let up. The next time I woke, I was alone with the elderly woman. A tugging sensation on my calf drew my attention, and I made the mistake of easing up to my elbows. "Mother Mary!" She motioned for me to lay back as she pulled a thread through my freaking skin. As much as I wished I'd pass back out, I couldn't. All I could do was chew the inside of my mouth and clutch my father's St. Christopher medallion hanging around my neck, while the woman stitched my wound closed. To my surprise, it didn't hurt as much as I would have expected. Every now and then, a shot of pain would steal my breath, but the idea of someone sewing me up like a rag doll with a torn seam was worse than the actual process. Whatever they'd poured onto my wound must have numbed it. Memories of how I came to be there came back in a rush. Speaking in Sicilian, I asked, "Where is Dante?" The woman motioned toward the door and pulled the needle through again. "Is he—" "No, morto." She smiled wide enough for me to realize she was missing teeth. "He lives." I laid back and closed my eyes. Images of Dante's pale face and lifeless body filled me. And then came the worries. Can you get an infection from swallowing too much seawater? How long had he gone without oxygen? Was he conscious? Talking? Brain dead? "Doctor?" I asked again in Sicilian. "Medico?" The woman held up 2 fingers. "Telefono?" "No." I laid back and swallowed my frustration. Dante had said not many people lived on the island, and most of the houses were near the harbor. Judging by my surroundings, I guessed we'd landed on the other side. The room didn't appear to have electricity. No lamps, no overhead light, no switches or outlets. The woman offered me a cup of water, mixed with lemon and herbs. My lips were chapped, and it tasted like something had died in my mouth, but the aromatic drink helped clear my throat. "Can I see Dante?" The old woman motioned to my leg. "No." "I have to try, please." She stood and held out her palm, and then her index finger, the universal signal for, "Give me a minute." "I'll wait." After much longer than a minute, the woman returned with a set of crutches, and the young boy from the boat. I couldn't believe my luck. They didn't have electricity, but they had medical equipment? Maybe there was a doctor nearby. "Thank you. Where did you get these?" The boy stepped forward. Keeping his eyes on his feet, he spoke in formal Italian. "My older brother broke his ankle on the rocks last year." "How is the man I was with? Dante?" Where is he? I need to see him. Where's the nearest phone? When will the doctor arrive?" The boy went wide-eyed and backed away. "I'm sorry." I placed the crutches under my arms and hoisted myself up. The effort made me dizzy and nauseous, but I needed to see Dante. "Where is my friend?" "Husband?" The boy gave me a curious grin, and the old woman narrowed her eyes. "Yes, husband." I hated to lie, but I'd spent most of my childhood in Sicily. Even on the main island, people tended to be rather old-fashioned about such things, especially in the rural areas. "Come." He led me to another bedroom. "This is where my parents sleep." I hobbled inside and let out something between a sob and a laugh when I saw Dante. While his color had improved overall, the bruises on his beautiful face had darkened, and someone had shaved his head nearly to the skin. Careful not to jostle him, I sat on the edge of the full-sized bed. Several smaller cuts and bruises dotted his chest and arms, but I didn't have any of the superficial wounds. He must have shielded me from the debris. I sandwiched his hand between mine. "Dante, can you hear me?" "Your husband woke the first night. Now Mama makes him sleep with her medicine. She says it is what he needs." "First night? How long have we been here?"
4 days.
He gave me a shy grin.
It is almost Christmas.
4 days? How is that even possible? I'd heard of people losing time while injured or drunk, but had a hard time believing we'd been on the island that long. Plus, what did that mean for Dante? He had a head injury. Wasn't there some rule about not sleeping after a concussion? What sort of medicine is she giving him? I tried to keep my voice even so I didn't spook him again.
The lemon water.
No wonder I'd lost all sense of time. I'd been drinking the magical mystery tea like crazy. Has Dante woken at all since the night we arrived? My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Has he eaten? Drank anything? How is she getting the tea down his throat? Has he spoken? So much for not spooking him. Get a grip, Frankie. The boy shrank back, but he seemed less freaked out than the first time I'd machine gun fired questions at him.
He wakes when it is time to drink.
He shrugged.
And he asks many questions.
Good. Questions are good. I relaxed my shoulders, but then it hit me that Dante could have memory issues. I wouldn't know for sure until I could speak to him. I'm not leaving him. The boy shrugged again and left the room. The longer I sat, the more the sedative wore off and the more my calf throbbed. I wanted to prop it up, or better yet, stretch out beside Dante and sleep. But I wasn't sure how my rescuers would feel about me making myself quite that comfy. I couldn't believe I'd lost so much time. Time that Sofia and Valentina had to spend in captivity, thanks to our psychopath brother. Val's marriage to Michela Salvo was to happen after the first of the year. And Sofia? Who would Tommaso force her to marry? Would it matter who he chose? Would she go along with it? Would he really kill her if she refused? My mind wandered to the explosion. As far as I knew, my brother wanted me alive. But who else would blow up a boat with the two of us on board? The question I didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop myself, was, how had Tommaso known I'd be on the yacht to begin with? How had someone planted a freaking bomb when Giancarlo's men were standing guard? Mia and Ari were there. I doubted one of Tommaso's men could have followed them, snuck on board and planted a bomb. But could they have been in on it? Did they buy the guards off, or were they the distraction? I ran a hand over Dante's arm. I desperately needed him to wake up, to tell me everything would be okay. He'd know what to do, wouldn't he? The boy came in with a fresh jug of the lemon and herbal mixture and some water. I chose the water. Grazie. Please stay. He looked from me to the door as if debating running away, or more likely wondering if he'd get into trouble. What is your name?
Cassio.
He puffed out his chest and raised his chin, as if his name was his most prized possession. I'm Frankie. This is Dante. His cheeks flushed.
You called for him.
I smiled the concern out of my voice. Does anyone know we are here?
My brother went to get the doctor from Panarea. He will be back today or tomorrow.
Is your father home? May I speak to him? He nodded and hurried out. I debated what to tell them about the explosion. If I told the truth, they could very well throw us out. Dante couldn't be moved, and I needed crutches to get around. Neither of us had shoes or proper clothing. We wouldn't get far before someone would put 2 and 2 together and come up with a yacht explosion. Still, I had no choice. I had to tell them who we were and what had happened in order to stress the danger, both to them for helping, and to us if Tommaso learned we'd survived. The elderly man came through the door, followed by his wife and the boy. Thank you for everything you've done. I drew a deep breath. My name is Francesca, and this is Dante. The woman pointed to herself and then the man. Maria and Tino. Rather than risking a misinterpretation because of our language differences, I turned to the boy. Cassio, tell them there was a bomb on the boat. He chewed his lip and muttered in the dialect. Although neither looked thrilled with the news, the couple nodded. I nodded to Cassio. Please tell them not to tell anyone we are here. The people who did this will come. We are all in danger. He relayed the message. Maria's eyes went wide. Speaking far too quickly for me to understand even the occasional word, she threw her hand up. Tino pulled her into an embrace and whispered to her until she calmed.
Medico?
He glanced between Cassio and me. Yes, we need a doctor. How far is the port? Can you call an ambulance or drive me there? Cassio shook his head.
No cars. No roads.
Certain I'd misunderstood him, I asked, What do you mean there are no roads? He shrugged.
We use mules.
Dante, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. When will the doctor come?
Tomorrow or the next day, Cassio said. He will not come on Christmas.
Tino asked his son a question, and I understood one word loud and clear.
Mafiosi.
I motioned between myself and Dante. No, but our family is. Cassio gave me a yeah right look and relayed the message. Tino made the sign of the cross and ushered his family out of the room. Great. Hopefully, it'll take the Carabinieri as long to reach us as it's taking the doctor. I gave up on worrying what they thought and stretched out beside Dante. Though I'd skipped the herbal tea, my thoughts grew fuzzy. Unsure of the day of the week, I wondered if Marco or Giancarlo were looking for us. Surely the yacht had GPS or something like a black box. Do they think we're dead? I couldn't help but worry about Dante's father. He was gravely ill. Would the news he'd lost another son cause his illness to worsen? At some point, I must have gone back to sleep, because I woke to Maria pulling the bandage from my leg. Curious, I rose to my elbows to see the cut. The memory of the gaping wound made my stomach roil. But it looked nothing like I remembered. Maria's stitches held the 6-inch gash closed. Pink skin bubbled between the sutures, but it didn't appear infected. In fact, the throbbing had stopped. She patted my arm and left the room. I curled closer to Dante to ward off the chill in the air. I really wish you'd wake up. He reached for me. I grabbed his hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt. Can you hear me? Dante opened his eyes and cracked a slight smile. Hey. Shh, easy. Don't talk yet. I sat up and eased my feet to the floor. I'll be right back.
Where are we?
He glanced around the Spartan room. I made it to the door and poked my head into the hall. Maria, he's awake. A few minutes later, she hustled into the room with a cup of the lemony water. He should drink. As much as I wanted to protest that her concoction would knock him out again, I bit my tongue. He needed fluids and sleep far more than I needed company and reassurance. I helped lift Dante's head while she tilted the cup to his lips. We managed to spill most of it down his chest, but he swallowed enough of the liquid to moisten his throat. What happened? He pushed the cup away and laid back. The boat exploded. A fisherman saved us. Elated that he had finally woken and seemed to be okay, I hated to get into the gory details so soon. How long? The sun says 4 days, but I honestly don't know. I've been out of it too. Dante glanced at me. Were you injured? Dehydrated and a cut on my leg. Nothing major. How do you feel? My skull feels like I was beaten with a tire iron. He ran his hand over the back of his head and winced. Stitches? And what the hell happened to my hair? I motioned to Sophia. She sewed us both up. Dante looked at the elderly woman and said something in her dialect. Maria blushed and nodded several times. He flashed her his dimples. The two had an entire conversation, and I managed to catch 3 words. Good and thank you. Dante turned back to me. You'd tell me if you were hurt. I'm fine. Better now that I know you're okay. I caressed his cheek. I asked them not to tell anyone we were here. They understood you. He chuckled and winced. They understand some Sicilian, and their son speaks formal Italian. I couldn't stop touching him. His face, his arm, his hand. How do you know their dialect? I did summer science camps here when I was a kid. They sent for a doctor, but he hasn't arrived. They don't have a phone or electricity or plumbing. Dante grinned the same little boy grin Cassio had earlier that day. She thinks you are my wife. I pressed my lips together. I might have told them that when we were rescued. I thought it best not to correct myself. Good plan. He ran his hand through my hair. Good idea to tell them to keep quiet about us being here. But people had to see the explosion. We need to leave. You need to see a doctor first. He pushed himself upright and gripped the edge of the bed. I will, but not here. Dante, please, rest. How could I be so stupid? I should have checked the engine before we left Trapani. Giancarlo had security. He stood and pressed his hand to the wall for support. I thought he'd fall, but he proved me wrong. Dante was too damned stubborn for his own good. I want to get out of here as much as you do. Time is running out for my sisters, remember? His shoulders fell. I should have told you about Sophia. You should have, but I understand why you didn't. He took a step toward the door, but stopped when he swayed like a drunk. I stood and wrapped my arm around his waist. You might as well sit down. We won't get very far on our own. We don't even have shoes. Maria came back into the room and stopped in her tracks. Her eyes went wide, her mouth fell open, and her cheeks flushed. Coming face to face with a frustrated and very naked Dante Marchionni would do that to a woman.
Chapter 32. Dante. The so-called doctor and Cassio's older brother arrived around lunchtime the following day. I took one look at the guy and knew I had a problem. A big one. Are you a physician? I tried to keep my voice down. Tried and failed. I felt like absolute shit, and I couldn't shake the feeling this guy was used to treating patients of the 4-legged variety. Be nice. Frankie's tone reminded me of my mother, threatening with a thick layer of pleasantry. Veterinario. The older gentleman gave me a smile too wide for a donkey doctor planning to examine my skull. Grinning, I nudged her shoulder. Did you catch that? What? She glanced between me and the vet. Nothing. I stood and stretched and did my damnedest not to pass out. I'm good. Have him look at your leg. Frankie huffed out of breath, clearly at the end of her patience. Sit down and let him examine you. Honestly, you are being such a baby about this. I'm not being a baby. I said I'm fine. Shit, I really need to work on my inside voice. The doctor went rigid, made the sign of the cross, and hurried into the hall. She rolled her eyes. Tell him you have a head injury. Folding my arms, I remained silent. Was I acting like a toddler? You bet. But we didn't have time for this. Unless I missed my mark, the good doctor knew who we were, or at least knew we had ties to the Cosa Nostra. We needed to get the hell out of there, and I needed a phone. My family was probably losing their minds. Not to mention, if Marco suspected Abruzzo was behind the bombing, there could very well be more bloodshed. Not that I'd mind if said bloodshed belonged to Tommaso Abruzzo. I'd make him pay for hurting Frankie one way or another. Frankie limped to the door and ushered the veterinarian back into the room, where she proceeded to pantomime being hit in the back of the head. The vet nodded and motioned for me to lie down. Talk to him, she demanded. Frowning, I gave the guy the rundown of what I remembered from the explosion and the days after, as well as my symptoms. Cassio stepped forward and filled in some of my missing memories. The kid told the vet that Frankie had dove back into the water to save me, that she'd performed CPR, that I'd vomited so much water he feared I'd sink their boat. I sat in stunned silence, imagining the hell she'd gone through while I was blissfully stoned on Maria's special tea. Speaking in local dialect, the vet asked, How long were you unconscious? I shrugged and motioned to Cassio. The boy held up 5 fingers. I did some quick math, but trying to figure out the current date made my brain hurt. It had to be either the 22nd or 23rd. One more reason to get out of here. I told Frankie we'd find a Christmas tree. Please go while the doctor examines me. I motioned to the door. Frankie opened her mouth as if to protest, but snapped it shut and followed Cassio out. As soon as we were alone, I turned to the vet. Do you have a phone? Si. He nodded and pulled a cell from his pocket. Do you mind if I borrow it? I will see that you are well paid for your trouble. He handed me the phone and turned for the door. Grazie. I hated to be rude, again, but I didn't need him overhearing my half of the conversation. I dialed Marco's cell and prepared to leave a voicemail. My brother was far too busy to answer calls from unknown numbers. Marchionni. The sound of his voice tightened my chest. Hey, bro. He went silent on the other end of the phone. It's Dante. Can you hear me? I'm here. Sorry, He cleared his throat. Where are you? It's been days. We all thought you were dead. We made it to the rural side of Alacudi. We're okay. Banged up, but okay. Never mind. He drew a shaky breath. How's Frankie? She's okay. Stitches in her leg, but she's healing. And mentally? How's she handling this? She has to know this was an attempt on her life. Until that moment, I hadn't stopped to think about it, but he was right. And that changed everything. We haven't gotten into it. I'm not sure if she's in shock or denial or if it hasn't hit her radar yet. What day is it? Marco sighed. It's Thursday, Christmas Eve. This isn't how I imagined spending our first Christmas together. What's the fallout? Have you met with the Fratellanza? Yesterday. It was ugly. Real ugly. Like I said, we thought you were dead. I could only imagine the turmoil the explosion and our disappearance had caused in Palermo. Did you order retaliation? I didn't have to. Giancarlo did, on the basis that he was supposed to be on the yacht. He lowered his voice. Mom and Pops are taking this hard. Tell them I'm alive, and come get us the hell out of here. Leo was on the phone with Ma now. I remembered I needed to have a conversation with Enzo, but it could wait. Come get us. I want Frankie and I to spend Christmas in Comiso. I'll come once the sun sets. A couple of hours tops. I'll need the address or the family's last name. The details floated around me like gnats. Too small and too many to catch. Evidently, Maria's special tea took time to clear the system. That, or I'd hit my head harder than I'd thought. That soon? Wait, why is he on the phone? Aren't you on the family compound? Leo and I arrived a couple days ago to go through the wreckage. Marco sounded as if he was struggling to hold himself together. Ma wanted something to put in your casket. His words stopped me cold. I hadn't realized I had tears running down my face. They landed in my lap. Working to keep my voice calm, I focused on the facts rather than the emotions. Mia and Ariana Abruzzo were waiting at the dock when Giancarlo and I arrived. Giancarlo told me and mentioned that Mia was hostile toward Frankie. Do you think they were involved? Maybe. I was really hoping you'd say no. This shit gets any deeper, I'm going to need scuba gear. Marco groaned. Either way, they are guests of the Lazios until this is settled. Hang on a sec. The line went quiet. Frankie slipped into the room and sat beside me. I held her hand and did my best to offer her a reassuring smile. Marco came back on the line. Dante, listen, I need you to stay dead. I'll have Leo get you out of there tonight, but you are going to the safe house. At first I thought he was joking, but I knew my brother. He wasn't that cruel. No fucking way are we going to stay on this island another day. I wouldn't ask unless it was necessary. Come on, man. You have to get us home for Christmas. I need to see Pops. I'd played a little dirty mentioning our dying father, but I didn't give a damn. It'll take some creativity, but I'll try, he sighed. Do you need anything? Besides finding the assholes responsible for this, Frankie could have been killed. As it is, Sophia and Valentina are being held against their will. We have to do something to stop Tommaso. She tensed and tightened her grip on my hand. I know, and I'm working on it. But you both could have been killed. Getting you two to someplace safe is my top priority. Marco blew out a breath. I need to know how to find you. Hold on. I'll give the cell to the doctor. I'll see you tonight. I didn't give a shit about myself. I hadn't been the target, and neither had Giancarlo. Tommaso had attempted to murder his own sister. Rather than argue, I went to the hall and asked the vet to give Marco the family's surname and address. Frankie wrapped her arms around me. Marco wants us to stay hidden? Yes, but I don't like it. I held her close, or as close as I could without causing either of us pain. I'm sure he has his reasons. He's probably up to his eyeballs in mafia politics. The vet knocked before opening the door. He motioned from the phone to me. Do you need to make another call? I held up my hands. Grazie, no. Will you let him examine you now? Frankie might have smiled, but the steel in her eyes told me I didn't have a choice. The last thing I wanted was to agree to a vet check. He'd probably shoot my ass full of horse tranquilizers. Did he look at your leg? Yes. He took the stitches out and replaced them with stera strips. At least let him do the same for you. She guided me back to the bed and motioned for the doctor to come closer. I turned to give the man access to the back of my head. How does it look? He poked me a couple times. I will remove the sutures. No need for strips. I stared at Frankie from the awkward position while the vet dug the sutures out of my scalp with what felt like a dull blade. When he finished torturing me, he pulled a bottle from his bag. You both need these 2 times a day until they're gone. Thank you. Please leave your name and number. I'd like to pay you for your time. I stared until I knew I had his full attention. And discretion. Of course. Although he'd had dug thread or wire or who the hell knew what out of my skin, he avoided touching my hand when I took his card. Evidently, I'd gone from patient to mafioso. As soon as the doctor left, Maria hurried in with a plate of fish and vegetables. She set the food on the bureau, patted my cheek, and kissed Frankie's. Enjoy your meal. Grazie. We owe you and your family our lives. I rested my hand on my heart. She waved me off and left the room. Frankie stood and filled 2 glasses with water from the pitcher by the window. What did Marco say? He and Leo are on Alacudi. Leo's coming to get us tonight. Tonight? Her face fell. How on earth will he find us in the dark? Wouldn't it be better to wait until morning? He is being cautious. Less chance of us being seen. I don't know what's happened with the Fratellanza since we've been here, but it doesn't sound good. I hesitated to tell her the rest, but if we stood a chance in hell of making it, I had to be honest. Giancarlo called for retribution because he should have been on the yacht, not me. He isn't wrong, but we both know I was the real target. Giancarlo was the bonus. Frankie dipped her chin. Dante, I hate to say it, but I think Mia and Ari were involved. I had the same thought. But if I've learned anything since being with you, it's not to assume the worst until you know the facts. Funny, I could say the same thing. She flashed me a devastating smile. We should eat before Maria comes in and scolds us.
Chapter 33. Frankie. My first year of boarding school in the United States had been tough. Everything was different. To make myself feel better, I'd close my eyes and conjure up every detail I could remember about home. The aromas of garlic and spices cooking in the kitchen, the soft texture of my well-worn quilt, the warmth of my dog curled against my legs. Lying there with Dante, all of those sensory memories came back. Other than curling up with a warm man instead of a Maltese, the tiny house by the sea reminded me of home. Or maybe it wasn't about the food or the quilt. Maybe it was Dante's strong arms keeping me safe. I forgot to ask you what you wanted for Christmas. He kissed the top of my head. Besides running water, I have everything I need. Chuckling, he whispered, "Public utilities aside, what do you want?" That's it. I propped my chin on my elbow. Nothing personal, but we've only been able to do sponge baths. You stink. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. You don't smell like roses either, babe. I'm serious. Giggling, I plugged my nose. He pulled me against his chest. Kiss me. It's almost nighttime. Leo will be here soon. I tried to pull away, but he held me in place. Kiss me. No way. I've been brushing my teeth with baking soda for days. I squirmed, trying to free myself of his grasp. I don't care. He rolled over, tucked me beneath him, and brushed his lips over mine. As far as kisses went, it was chaste, but perfect for my anxious mood. Happy now? He shook his head and did it again, only there was nothing sweet about the lip lock he laid on me. I felt it all the way to my toes. Dante whispered, "I love you." I smiled, though my chin quivered. He rolled off me and ran his hand up and down my arm. Did I hurt you? Are you okay? I was so scared. It's okay, babe. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. Dante brushed my hair back from my brow and kissed my temple. I'm thankful for you and living to see another day and being able to spend our first Christmas together. I love you so damned much. Once again, he didn't say what he'd banish, but I knew. The list was too long and growing longer by the minute. Resting my head on his chest, I said, I'm thankful for you and Tino, Maria and Cassio, and for Leo and Marco for rescuing us. Mostly, I'm thankful we made up. Me too. Dante pulled the blanket higher on my shoulder and pulled me close. I must have drifted off again, because I woke to Dante kissing a line down my chest. Hi. Hi. He tugged at the house dress Maria had loaned me. This would look better on the floor. As much as I would have loved to be intimate with him, to feel his skin against mine, to forget everything except chasing our pleasure, I had to put a stop to it before we got caught. Nope. No, it won't. We're not doing anything that involves nudity here. Dante made his way to my collarbone. Sex has been proven to cure headaches. The windows are open. They will hear us. He caressed my breasts before easing me on top of him and kissing me senseless. They will think it's perfectly natural. We're married, remember? I hated to do it, but I played the one card that would kill his mood quicker than a cold shower. We don't have any condoms. Shit. Until that moment, I would have never thought a pouty face could be attractive on a man. But it was. God help me, it was. And I haven't taken birth control since it blew up with the boat. Damn. I eased to the side and trailed my hand down the center of his chest to his erection. This is such a terrible thing to waste. But no. I agree. He threw the quilt back and wrapped his hand around his cock. What the heck is he thinking? Dante, get under the covers. Why? Holding my gaze, he ran his hand up and down his shaft. I couldn't help but stare. You're killing me. I could say the same to you. His breath hitched as he increased his speed. Get under the blanket and I'll help out. He grinned, but didn't stop his hand. With your mouth? No way. You're getting a hand job. But only if you cover up. You will give Maria a heart attack if you don't put that thing away. He chuckled and pulled the quilt over us. I scooted closer and placed my fingers over his. I don't like to be teased. Something else we have in common. He moved his hand to allow me to take over. I tightened my grip and stroked him one slow inch at a time. Relishing the way his body responded, I took note of every tensed muscle, quick breath, soft moan. Babe, that feels. Dante massaged my shoulder, hip, ass, anywhere and everywhere. But never for more than a few seconds. As if he didn't quite know what to do with himself. Moving my hand quicker, I focused on nothing but his pleasure. Nothing else mattered in those few stolen moments except being with him and making him feel good. I'm close. He tugged me tighter to his side. I didn't stop until we'd made quite the mess. A slow smile spread across his face. I'll never complain about a hand job again. Feel better? I slipped from the bed and grabbed a damp cloth from the wash basin. After cleaning up, Dante flipped me to my back and slid his hand between my legs. Your turn. Laughing, I clamped my thighs together. It'll take too long. Oh, ye of little faith. Dante pinned me to the bed. I have total faith in your ability to make me come, but I lost my train of thought when he buried his face between my breasts and worked my clit like a scroll wheel on a mouse. Someone knocked, and a split second later, the door opened. Maria gasped, nearly running headlong into Leo in her retreat. I yelped and hid my face under the quilt, or tried to. Most of the fabric had ended up beneath us. Feeling better, little brother? Leo motioned to the hall. Shall I come back later? Give us a sec. Dante spoke against my breast. Please. I brought warm clothing and shoes. Laughing, Leo dropped a backpack near the door and left the room. Shoving him off of me, I said, I told you someone would come in. Oh my God, how am I supposed to walk out of here? Dante bit his lip as if to hold back laughter. He seemed entirely too pleased for a man who'd gotten caught with his fingers in the cookie jar. I crawled out of bed and pulled a pair of women's sweats from the bag. Don't look at me like that. It's not funny. He put on a pair of jeans, turned, and grabbed me around the waist. You're cute when you're embarrassed. Keep digging that hole, buddy. I waggled my finger in front of his face, but my laughter belied my attempt to be stern. We finished dressing just in the nick of time. Everyone decent? Leo knocked lightly. Come in. Dante took a step toward his brother. Leo hugged him tight enough to break a rib or two. Are you all right? I'm good. Sore. But it's really good to see you. Dante pulled back and wiped his eyes. Looks like your hair didn't survive. Leo chuckled. He ran his hand over the peach fuzz. I don't know why Maria shaved it all off. The least she could have done was leave a mohawk. Laughing softly, I said, I kind of like it. It brings out your eyes. Leo embraced me so quickly, I barely had time to register what was happening before he had me in his arms. I understand you're the hero in this story. Thank you. I didn't know how to respond, nor could I form a sentence. All I could think about was he didn't hate me or seem to blame me for the shooting. If one Marchionni could accept me, could they all? Would Enzo? Dante saved me from turning into a blubbering idiot. What's the plan? Do you have security? Leo released me. 2 men. I didn't want to draw too much attention. My mouth went dry. Do you think Tommaso knows we're here? No. I haven't seen anyone I recognize on the island. But better safe than sorry. The fewer people who can identify you two, the better, Leo said. We just have to make it to the boat in the cart.
I realize there are no roads, but won't pulling a cart to the dock seem suspicious? Dante sounded as skeptical as I felt. Marco and I have been collecting wreckage all day. I've already started the rumor that someone may have found your... He glanced at me as if second-guessing what he was about to say. That they found personal effects. You told people Tino found our bodies. My mouth fell open. Won't that put them in more danger? Leo said, I didn't mention any names. How do we get from the cart to the boat? Dante seemed to grow more nervous by the second, which did nothing to calm my rising anxiety. I brought provisions. What the hell does that mean? Dante had taken the words out of my mouth. Leo made a swirling motion. We wrap you up in tarps. You just have to be still while someone carries you. You mean play dead? Dante's voice rose. Honestly, I think I'd prefer playing dead all the way to the safe house rather than setting foot on another yacht. The idea of being on the water sent a chill down my spine. We'd come so close to dying. Had he not found the bomb when he did? My brain powered down, unwilling to consider the what-ifs. We aren't going to the safe house. We're going to Comiso. Leo softened his voice. It's going to be okay. I nodded, but was far from convinced. Dante took my hand. Hey, I promised you I wouldn't let anything happen to you, remember? Nodding, I murmured. Let's get this over with. Do you have everything? Leo glanced around the room. All we have is what we're wearing. Oh, and our antibiotics. I grabbed them from the nightstand and stuffed the bottle into my pocket. Leo's expression waffled between concerned and curious. He had to have a million questions, but they'd wait until things settled. I hate to ask, but do you have any cash on you? I need to give Tino something for his trouble, Dante said. Leo handed him all of the cash in his wallet. It's not much. Dante shoved the money into his pocket. I intend to do something for them once this is over. But if people are looking for us, it's best they keep their normal routines. We should say goodbye. An overwhelming sense of sadness engulfed me. Despite the circumstances of our arrival, I'd felt safe in the tiny house. The world outside the front door was far more chaotic. Dante spoke to Tino in the local dialect and handed him the euros. Tino shook his head and tried to hand the money back, but he eventually put it in his wallet. Maria gave me a hug, kissed both cheeks, and filled the empty backpack with food without meeting my gaze once. Not that I could blame her. After what she'd walked in on, I half expected her to douse us with holy water and pray the rosary. I knelt in front of Cassio and kissed his scarlet cheeks. Thank you for helping me, the boy whispered. I will miss you, beautiful lady. I will miss you too. You've been so brave. You're my hero. I hugged him tight, one last time. In the courtyard, Dante and I climbed into the wagon, and Leo's security team covered us with tarps. Only these were unlike any tarp I'd ever seen. Why are there zippers? I knew the answer, but I didn't want to believe it. Body bags, Dante growled. Oh, no. 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 Relax. We won't zip them all the way. Leo sounded far too amused. We're going to put some of the wreckage around you. Try to be still. I clung to Dante as what felt like long pieces of wood rested against my back. Will we be safe in here? It's going to be bumpy, but we'll be fine. Are you sure no one's looking for us? The idea of Tommaso coming for me made my blood run cold. Probably not. If anyone was searching, I'm sure they're gone by now. Hold on to me and think happy thoughts. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't imagine home like I'd done as a teen away at school. Instead, my brother's twisted, angry face filled my mind.
Chapter 34, Dante. The ride to the dock with piles of wreckage falling on me sucked, but nothing could compare to being sealed into a giant Ziploc bag. Seriously, I'd survived an explosion, a head wound, and high doses of homemade sedatives, but the few minutes I spent in the body bag about killed me. The second I hit the floor, I clawed my way out of the thick plastic and drew a deep breath. "Where's Frankie?" Marco stared for a couple of seconds before offering me a trembling hand. "They're bringing her in now." Embracing him, I said, "Thank you for getting us out of here." "You're welcome, but don't ever do something like this again." He squeezed me tighter. "Trust me, I have no intention of coming that close to death until I'm 100 or so." "Works for me. You'll probably be bald then, too." Marco grinned, as if quite proud of his joke. "Ha ha." A member of his security team walked into the room with a second black bag draped across his arms. I never would have thought it possible such a big guy could be gentle, but he rested the bag on the sofa as if laying a newborn into a crib. I lunged for her and lowered the zipper. "It's safe now." "Oh, thank God." Frankie wiggled her way free and threw herself into my arms. "Are you okay?" I ran my hands over her arms, her shoulders, her face. "I'm good, but that was an experience I'm not looking forward to repeating." Once I was sure she didn't have any new cuts or bruises, I brushed my lips across hers and pulled her to my side. "Tell me about it." Marco nodded to the guard. "Tell Leo we're ready to go." He turned and left without a word. "You two need to stay below." Marco watched us, as if unsure how to respond to our touching. Then again, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen me with a woman. "No problem." I guided Frankie to the opposite couch and sat beside her. "What's the plan?" "We take the yacht to Panadea, then board a plane to Comiso." He seemed to read my mind, because he added, "I've had guards on this boat and the plane since Leo and I arrived. No one who isn't in my inner circle has gotten close to either." "What happens when we're on the ground in Comiso?" Frankie glanced between us. Marco's expression softened. "You'll spend Christmas with our family, and a dozen or so invited guests, but as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you two are dead." The color drained from her face. "I thought you didn't want anyone to know we were alive." "Once our mother found out her baby boy was alive, that plan went out the window. At least with anyone who was staying at the villa." Marco chuckled. "You two might want to get a shower before we reach Panadea. I'm sure there will be a welcoming committee." Frankie perked up. "I'd love a shower." "Hang on a second and I'll join you." As much as I'd love to get wet and naked with her, I had questions, lots of questions. As a general rule, our mother kept Christmas to family members only, and considering our dad's health, I couldn't imagine why there would be so many extra people at the villa. Guests? Marco gave me his "I know something you don't" look. Leo and Dahlia are getting married on New Year's Eve. While I wasn't surprised by the news, I'd be lying if I said the timing didn't bug me. They were planning a wedding when they thought I was dead? He waved his hand. "They set the date before the explosion. Postponed it, then decided to go ahead with the ceremony when they found out you were alive." Nodding slowly, I said, "We're spending Christmas with wedding guests? Is the governor there?" "Yes, but don't worry. If my plan works, you'll be alive and well by New Year's." He turned to Frankie. "By the way, thanks for Merriweather's login info. We were able to pin the shooting on Robert Becker. You'll be able to return to the States without an arrest warrant hanging over your head." "That's great." She squeezed my hand. Marco seemed surprised by our reactions. "Don't feel too bad for the guy. He tried to kill Leo and Dahlia. He's getting what he deserves. Plus, Merriweather has admitted to working with Becker to make Dahlia believe she had a stalker." I disagreed with his Machiavellian methods, but we had bigger problems than a couple of crooked politicians. "I'm glad Dahlia and Gunnar are safe, but we need to focus on Tommaso." "We do, but that's going to take time." Frankie rolled her lips in. "I need to get word to Iris and my sisters that I'm okay." "That's not a good idea." I pulled her closer, but she tensed. "We don't know which side your sisters are on, and Iris probably hasn't heard about the explosion. I'm sure she's fine." "Dante's right." Marco nodded and motioned to the couch. "Sit, please. We should talk first." She didn't look any happier than I felt about postponing our date with running water, but we both sat. I asked, "What's the plan?" "Once everything is done, we'll stage a rescue. Head wounds are tricky. You could have been out for weeks. Amnesia, whatever. Then you and Frankie return to the States and get on with life." She furrowed her brow but remained quiet. "Won't that look suspicious? You just carried body bags onto the boat. How the hell are you going to play this?" I wanted to trust him, but I wasn't sure where his head was when it came to Frankie. I didn't think he'd throw her under the bus, but I had to be sure. If anyone saw us, and I don't think they did, it's not my problem if they jumped to the wrong conclusions. He seated himself across from us. I had the feeling there was more to the plan than he was letting on. It's never that easy. Hope for the best and plan for the worst, brother. She drew a deep breath. What about my sisters? Are they part of the negotiation? He ran his hand over the back of his neck. Giancarlo has asked for Valentina's hand in marriage, as part of his retribution. Frankie shot to her feet, sucked in a pained breath, and sat back down. What? How does that help? What about Tommaso? Is he going to get away with this? It breaks the engagement to Salvo and buys us time. Marco glanced at me as if begging for an assist. As for Tommaso, he's the only living male heir. That's bullshit, and you know it. I didn't want to fight with him. Not after he'd rescued us. Not on Christmas Eve. But I would, because Frankie would never be safe as long as Tommaso was breathing. We need to tell Enzo the truth. No, we don't. Marco raised his chin. This past week has been hell. Pops can't take another emotional blow, and Enzo's still recovering from taking a bullet to the chest. He shouldn't have traveled to Sicily so soon after surgery. I'm not putting this family through any more trauma. Frankie folded in on herself. I understand. Well, I don't. Once again, I found myself swallowing my emotions and focusing on the facts. This isn't just about Frankie and her sisters. Enzo will never be safe as long as Tommaso is in power. Marco rubbed his forehead. And if we implode our family and he still refuses to make a claim for the Abruzzo seat on the Fratellanza? That's his choice. He has a right to know the truth and to make his own decisions. I rested my elbows on my knees and waited for him to look me in the eye. I'll keep it between me and Enzo, but I am going to tell him. Marco narrowed his eyes at me, but addressed Frankie. Forgive me, but Sophia has confessed to trying to kill my entire family, including innocent women and children. And let's not forget Mia and Ariana may very well have helped your brother try to kill you. Her eyes widened. Marco, that's enough. I'd had about all I could take. He kept on talking as if he hadn't heard me. Give me 2 days to work out a deal with Giancarlo and take it to the Fratellanza. Tomorrow is Christmas. Please, don't ruin what could be my family's last holiday with my father. Screw keeping my emotions in check. Screw gratitude for the rescue. Don't you dare put that kind of guilt on her. I stood and stormed to the bar. Frankie and I will discuss it and do what we think is best. Marco shouted a string of curses in Italian, ending with, selfish prick. She cleared her throat. Frankie is sitting right here and is more than capable of speaking for herself. I gave my brother a see-what-you-dig glare. She turned to Marco. You have 2 days to find a way to either put an end to Tommaso or get all 4 of my sisters to safety. Otherwise, I'll not only tell Enzo the truth myself, I'll march into the Fratellanza and make some demands of my own. Unless things have changed in my absence, Tommaso has the right to sell us like cattle, but he isn't allowed to kill us. You're absolutely right. He threw his head back in laughter. And now, I get what my brother sees in you. I'd never been prouder of Frankie or more ready to throttle my brother. Watch it. He held up his hands. Relax, Dante. She gave me an idea. What if the 2 of you don't play dead? What if we go to Palermo and tell everyone Tommaso tried to kill you 2, and a very strong motive for his attempts on Enzo's life? Testimony before the Fratellanza is strictly confidential. Like how Pietro Lazio's meltdown was kept secret? I didn't like the sound of this any more than I had his previous ideas. Fine, then we have a discreet conversation with Enzo before the meeting, but there is no reason to involve our parents. Frankie glanced at me and nodded. I'm listening. I poured 3 glasses of wine and returned to the sofa. Rubbing his hands together, he turned to her. You have the DNA results? Her expression fell. They were in the jeans I was wearing when the boat exploded. Damn it. He dragged his hand down his face. You can get another copy, right? Yes and no. Frankie muttered a few curses of her own.
Chapter 35. Frankie. The house at the center of the Marchionni compound was called Villa dei Fiori for a reason. Its whitewashed walls provided the perfect backdrop for brilliant displays of bougainvillea and many other flowers that I couldn't name. Even in the middle of winter, the place had a spring-like quality. As welcoming as the house seemed, I didn't want to get out of the car. Some part of my reptilian brain clung to my childhood notion that the Marchionnis were evil ogres dressed in designer clothing. It'll be okay. Dante lifted my hand and placed a kiss in my palm. I won't leave your side. Promise? I tore my eyes away from the massive windows and what I imagined to be dozens of prying eyes. Promise. He opened the door and pulled me out with him. It's late. I imagine everyone will be in bed. I hope so. Holding onto him tighter than I had the life vest in the sea, I put one foot in front of the other. We'd made it halfway up the stone walkway when people poured out of the villa. Most wore pajamas, but they all wore wide smiles. A little boy who looked to be 5 or 6 years old broke free of the pack and reached us first. Uncle Dante! Hey, Ryan. He swung the child into his arms. Why aren't you in bed? Santa can't visit until you're asleep.
Noni said we can open 2 presents when you and Frank got here. Where's Frank?
Ryan glanced at me and furrowed his brow.
What happened to your hair?
I shaved it. Biting back a huge grin, Dante nodded to me. That's Frankie. He gave his uncle a yeah right look.
That's a weird name for a lady. It's short for Francesca. Duh.
A tween girl clicked her tongue and rolled her eyes. Hey, Chloe. Dante put Ryan down and hugged her. She sighed against him, and for a moment I thought she'd cry. Instead, she pulled back and planted her hands on her hips.
Daddy told us you were dead. I had to see if you were a zombie or an alien or something.
Laughing, Dante said, Now that you mention it, I have been craving brains lately. Chloe doesn't have brains, only air. Zach gave Dante a half hug and me a real one. Good to see you again, Frankie. You too. I'd never spent much time around children, but they were enough to turn my biological clock forward a few years. And holy smokes, the way Dante interacted with them was one of the hottest things I'd ever seen. Then again, of course he'd make a great dad. The man had turned a studio apartment into a game room.
All right, you guys, let's go pick out which gifts to open.
A blonde woman gave Dante a bear hug, whispered something in his ear, and took the children back inside. Leading me toward his family, he leaned close and lowered his voice. That was Maggie, Gabe's wife. The kids are Joe's, but they're raising them. Then there's Ella, who is Gabe's daughter by a one-night stand, and Rocco is the youngest. He's Maggie and Gabe's. My head exploded halfway through the explanation. Please tell me there won't be a pop quiz. Not until you meet the babies. He winked. Glad you're home, little brother. Gabe embraced Dante. The floodgates opened, and more people joined in. Before it was over, he was buried 3 deep in arms and well wishes. Walking slower than the rest, Enzo made it to the fray. However, he held his arm out to me. May I? Something about the way he studied my face sent a rush of warmth through me. For one brief shining moment, I allowed myself to believe he knew I was his sister. Nodding, I hugged him. Enzo winced, but used his good arm to pull me tight. It's good to see you again, Frankie. Welcome. Thank you. I fought hard to hold back my tears. Not that it mattered. Most of the Marchionnis in the crowd were crying and laughing and hugging. I'd never been around such an affectionate bunch. Enzo eased back, but kept his hand on my shoulder. I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Shauna. It's nice to finally meet you. A tiny woman with spiky hair offered me her hand, but before I could take it, she seemed to change her mind and go in for a hug. She released me, wiped her eyes, and muttered something about pregnancy hormones. I liked her instantly. Nice to meet you too. Buon Natale. Merry Christmas. Enzo reached over and rubbed Dante's fuzzy head.
And having you two home is the best present of all." A chorus on Buon Natales and Merry Christmases filled the air as we walked inside. I'd grown up in a large family, a large Italian family, but I'd never experienced anything like it. Sure, it wasn't every day a son returned from the dead. However, I had the feeling the Marchionnis were loud and warm and full of love every other day of the year. The living room was massive, but what impressed me the most was the gigantic tree set near a wall of sliding glass doors. Colorful bulbs gave the otherwise dim room a homey holiday feel. I would have expected the Marchionnis to have an over-the-top designer motif, but the ornaments consisted of construction paper chains, yarn woven around popsicle sticks, and Santas with cotton balls for beards. The family quieted when Evelyn pushed Papa Joe's wheelchair into the room. The matriarch of the family was a wisp of a woman, thin, short, and beautiful. Her diminutive size didn't fool me. She was a force of nature capable of commanding a legion of overgrown boys, their wives, and her grandchildren with a single raised brow. "Ma." Dante stepped out of the crowd. Evelyn made the sign of the cross, pressed her hand to her chest, and burst into tears. "See? He's safe. What did I tell you?" Papa Joe gripped his wife's arm. He might have played the tough guy, but there was no mistaking the quiver in his voice. Dante took me by the hand and pulled me toward his parents. I wanted to protest I didn't belong there, to step back and give them a moment alone, to go back to the relative safety of Enzo and Shauna. But I couldn't find the words. He wrapped his mother in a warm embrace and held her as she sobbed against his chest. "It's okay, Ma. I'm home. I'm home." She pulled back enough to search his face. "You are bruised like a ripe banana. And what did they do to your beautiful curls?" Papa Joe reached up and caressed his son's cheek. "You did good, kid. I'm proud." Dante released my hand and wrapped his free arm around his dad. "I love you, Pops. Love you too." The elder Marchionni buried his face in his son's shoulder. "Buon Natale." Evelyn caught me staring and pursed her lips while giving me a quick once-over. I braced myself for impact. If anyone would have something nasty to say to me, it would be her. "Little Francesca Abruzzo, you have grown into a beautiful woman." Her smile took 10 years off her face. "I understand you saved my baby's life." "Ma," Dante grinned his bashful aw-shucks grin. "What?" She pinched his cheeks. "Can a mother not speak to the woman her son is in love with?" "Ma." This time he spoke in a sterner tone, but even in the dim light, his blush was hard to miss. Evelyn rolled her eyes and closed the distance between us. I didn't know if I should shake her hand or kiss her cheeks. Thankfully, she solved the dilemma by pulling me into an embrace. "Welcome to the family, Frankie." The Marchionnis standing behind us murmured as if stunned. Maybe they were. I certainly was. "Thank you." She captured my face between her palms, looked into my eyes, and smiled. "You will treat my son well. Yes?" Nodding, I whispered, "I love him." Evelyn patted my cheek. "Good. You two should have privacy. I've had the guest house made up for you." Before I could react or even understand the significance of what she'd said, several of Dante's brothers groaned, whined, and called out things like, "No fair," and "They aren't married," and "He was always your favorite." Evelyn silenced them with a look. "Come. I promised my grandchildren they could open 2 presents." I settled on a U-shaped sectional next to Dante to watch the kids tear into their gifts, but I found myself staring at the older members of the family. Each of Dante's brothers sat with their wives. Marco and Nico had their infant daughter resting between them. Everyone seemed so comfy in their pajamas and at peace in the glow from the tree. What would it have been like to grow up here, to be a part of a real family? Stretching his arms over his head, Dante yawned and announced, "I'm exhausted. Frankie and I are going to bed.
Marco's mouth fell open.
Together, right? You heard that, Ma. They're going to engage in premarital sex under your roof.
Evelyn ignored him. Of course, darling. You two need your rest. I had the housekeeper put fresh sheets on the bed and stock the fridge. But I'd like it if you'd both join us for Christmas lunch.
Lunch?
Enzo seemed to choke on his own spit.
You're giving them permission to share a bed and sleep in?
Dahlia and I are getting married in a week.
Why can't we share a room?
Leo chimed in. The woman beside him swatted his arm. I'm perfectly fine waiting until the honeymoon.
That's crap.
Laughing, Leo turned to his mom.
We always knew Dante was your favorite.
I love you all equally. She put her hands on her hips, the same way her granddaughter had earlier. You survive a bomb and 5 days as castaways, and you can sleep wherever and with whomever you want.
Gabe coughed into his hand. Bullshit. Ma, it's not like he was living in a grass hut with a volleyball for a friend. They were staying with a very nice family,
Marco whined. Evelyn glanced between her sons.
Leo, I understand. But what differences does this make to the rest of you? You are already married. It's the principle of the matter.
Gabe winked at me.
No offense. We think it's great our little brother finally found a woman willing to put up with him.
Not wanting to get in the middle of the debate, I held up my hands. None taken.
Screw this.
Dante stood, pulled me to my feet, and laid one heck of a kiss on me.
We're going to bed.
The display of affection ignited another round of groans, laughter, and more protests. Part of me wanted to crawl under the sofa, but the bigger part loved the chaos of it all. I could only imagine what tomorrow would be like when all of the children were added to the mix. Papa Joe turned to me and cracked that damned Marchionni grin.
Welcome to the family, Frankie.
Chapter 36. Dante. Had I known my mother would be so sweet, I would have taken a joyride on a rigged boat sooner. Or not. I couldn't make heads or tails of the way she was treating me and Frankie. Sure, she'd told me she'd learned her lesson with my older brothers and their wives, but allowing me to share a bed with a woman was completely out of character for my mom. And then there was her reaction when I first told her I was in love with Frankie. Why is she pushing us together? Is she actually happy with my choice, or is there something else to it? You'd think it would be weird, knowing the woman I loved was my brother's sister, or, in my mother's case, the daughter of her lover, but it strangely wasn't, no matter how it sounded. Frankie ran her fingertips over the well-worn leather sofa before walking to the fireplace. This place reminds me of something from a storybook. I half expect the 3 bears to show up and kick us out. 3 bears or 4 brothers. If they had their way, I'd be sleeping in the wine cellar and you'd be sharing a room with Dahlia. I poked my head in the fridge and made a mental note to buy my mom something expensive for her birthday. Not only was it full of my favorite things. Hungry? Ma, put some hoagies in here. Not really, but I'd love to crawl into bed. She met my gaze and winked. Naked. I loved the way she thought. Hell, I loved everything about her, including how she fit in with my ridiculous family. Taking her hand, I led her down the hall to the master bedroom. After almost a week at Maria's, I think we can make it work. Stripping out of the sweat, she said, Your parents must have imported this from the States. Most Italians have never heard of a California king I was pretty sure she said more, but my brain had stopped functioning when I realized she'd gone commando under the clothes that Leo had brought. Frankie bit back a grin. Your brother forgot to pack a bra and panties for me. That's it. He's replaced Marco as my favorite. I tossed the dozen or so throw pillows on the floor and turned down the comforter. All of your brothers are great, and so are your parents. And the kids. Your entire family really surprised me. I thought they'd have a problem with me being here. She snuggled in beneath the blankets. I thought the same thing, but I kept that little tidbit to myself. I slipped in beside her and pulled her back to my chest. It probably has something to do with you saving my life. Let's hope they feel the same after we meet with the Fratellanza. Nothing will change. You have no control over mob politics. I sighed and opened the can of worms otherwise known as her sisters. Marco was an ass about it, but he was right about Mia and Ariana. We have to be careful until we know what they did or did not have to do with the bomb. I know, but I hate that they think I'm dead. And Sophia. She snapped her mouth shut and went still. It's okay. She may never be my favorite person, but she's your sister. I'll learn to tolerate her. Thank you. Frankie relaxed in my arms. I wish I could let them know I'm alive, but I understand why I can't. Let's not think about that tonight. It's Christmas. Between her warm, naked body and finally feeling safe in the walled compound, I could barely keep my eyes open. I'd like you to move in with me when we get back to the States. Frankie tensed. You mean if I return to New Orleans? There is no if. I turned her to face me. You're coming back with me. We're going to start our own cybersecurity company and volunteer to build houses for the needy. We'll get a dog or a cat or one of each and build a life together. She stared for what felt like an eternity before she nodded. I love everything about that, but no buts. Brushing her hair back from her face, I whispered, How do you feel about marriage? Her eyes widened. Way to go, Dante. I mean, one day in the future. I should have known better than to get into yet another serious topic, but it was too late to pull the words back. Is it something you might want, or are you more of a who needs a piece of paper kind of woman? I'm not opposed to marriage. She ran her hand up my back. But what about kids? Do you want a house full like Gabe and Maggie? I thought back to Gunnar at the hospital. How I'd imagined having a little girl with Frankie. I'd like to have a daughter who looks like you. She yawned and nuzzled closer. I'd like that, as long as she has your eyes. We're going to have a great future, babe. Just you wait and see. I sent up a prayer that we'd have it all, and more. I love you, Dante. I love you too. I held her until she fell asleep, kissed her cheek, and followed her into dreamland. I had no idea what time it was, but the sun had risen and someone was knocking on the front door. Thinking it was one of the kids coming to tell us breakfast was ready, I ignored it. The knocking grew louder. You should see who that is, Frankie muttered without opening her eyes. I'd rather not. I caressed her back before leaning in to kiss her neck. The door opened, and footsteps echoed off the terracotta tiles in the foyer. Dante, it's Enzo. I need to talk to Frankie. Be right there. She shot out of bed and was half dressed before I'd registered his words. Mourning the loss of her warm body beside mine, I was far less enthusiastic to speak to my brother. You're getting around better. How's your leg? It's fine, as long as I don't think about it too much, or try to run a marathon. She flashed me a smile as bright as the star in the tree. Come on, Enzo is waiting. I pulled on a pair of sweats and followed her to the front room. Enzo stood near the smoldering fireplace with his back to us. Judging by the slump of his shoulders, he was either in pain from the gunshot wound or something else had happened. Something we weren't going to like. Buon Natale, brother. I stepped forward to give him a hug, but his somber expression stopped me short. Everything okay? He scrubbed his hand over his face and turned to Frankie. I'm aware that I am your half-brother. Blood whooshed through my ears so violently I could barely hear myself think. Frankie gasped. You know? Enzo sank onto the sofa. I found out the week before the shooting. But how? She glanced at me as if expecting the answers. I'm married to a private investigator. Enzo deadpanned. Oh. Frankie rolled her lips in, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and finally seated herself beside Enzo. To say seeing them side by side and knowing they were siblings was jarring would be an understatement. I didn't know what to say or do, other than to give them some privacy. I'll get some espresso going. Thanks, bro. Enzo softened his voice. I should start by apologizing for stealing your mail. That was you? You stole the DNA results? The lift of her voice told me she was stunned, but amused. Technically, it was Shauna, Enzo said. I couldn't figure out why you took the bloody bandage, or why you were following me around at the party. She put two and two together. Frankie nodded. I should have come to you, but I wasn't sure how you'd react. It's a good thing you didn't. He drew a deep breath. It's taken time and a few conversations with my mother to come to grips with all of this. How did Ma react when you confronted her? I set the mocha pot on the burner and plopped into a chair. She was surprised, but not overly so. He dipped his chin. She was more ashamed than anything. I can imagine. I hated that my mother had been unfaithful. She'd done a lot of questionable things over the years, but stepping out on Dad took the freaking cannoli. No pun intended. This isn't the end of the world, Dante. In fact, it explains a lot about me and my childhood. He glanced at me and shrugged a small, embarrassed shrug. I've always been the odd duck in this family. I agreed, but that wasn't the time to get into it. Marco told me about the situation with our sisters. I'm sorry, but not going to challenge Tommaso for the Abruzzo seat on the Fratellanza. She nodded. Please, understand. I'm going to be a father. I will not have my wife and child involved with the Cosa Nostra. Frankie rested her hand on Enzo's. You don't need to worry about challenging Tommaso. We have a plan to get them away from Tommaso that doesn't involve you. He nodded but looked away. I had a feeling the decision to refuse to help his newfound sisters had weighed heavily on him. Frankie's right. There's no need for you to get involved. I didn't have the heart to tell him he was already up to his elbows in it, that he'd dodge more bullets than he knew. If everything went well with the Fratellanza, he could live the rest of his life and never find out he was supposed to be in the car instead of Joe and Rebecca. Marco knocked and stepped inside without waiting for a reply. Dante, good, you're awake. We need to go. Frankie frowned and gave me a what now look. Go where? It's Christmas. I had spoken harsher than I intended, but I wasn't sure I could handle any more surprises before I was properly caffeinated. Marco frowned. The honor of my presence is being requested at Valentina and Michele Salvo's wedding tonight. You two have to speak to the Fratellanza before the ceremony. Frankie shot to her feet. I thought Giancarlo asked for her hand as part of his retribution. He did, but Tommaso is making his move now, before the matter is decided. Please, tell me you aren't going to the Abruzzo compound. This could be a trap. Her voice thinned. The ceremony is at the communal estate, neutral ground, but we aren't taking any chances. I'll have security on you. No way. She's not going. You know as well as I do, Tommaso will demand we return Frankie to him as soon as he realizes she's alive. I wouldn't risk losing her, not over something as stupid as an obvious stunt to get us all in the same place. I know he will. Marco stiffened his spine. Which is why you two need to speak to the other capos before the ceremony. Cursing under his breath, Enzo stood. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Marco folded his arms. He's right. It's too dangerous. Frankie set her hand on Enzo's shoulder. Marco narrowed his eyes at them, glanced at me, and sighed. You told him? I didn't have to. He and Shauna figured it out. Enzo's voice rose. He is standing right here and will make his own damn decisions. Enzo reminded me so much of Frankie in that moment, it stole my breath. You're not going. End of story. Marco dismissed Enzo by turning his attention to Frankie. You can't show up in sweats. Go to the main house and help Nico pack a bag for you. She raised her chin, much like her half-brother had done moments before. Enzo needs to understand the situation. All of it. I could all but see Marco's blood pressure rising. Maybe it was the stress of his position, or maybe he'd grown too used to people obeying his commands, but he reminded me of a tea kettle ready to blow. Everyone, take a deep breath and calm down. It won't do anyone any good if we show up in Palermo at each other's throats. I turned the mocha pot off and poured 4 cups of espresso. Marco glared between the 3 of us before settling on Enzo. Tommaso has been trying to kill you for years, starting with Joe and Rebecca's murders. If you walk into the estate, he will finish the job. That's enough. I couldn't get over how crass he'd become. I don't know what the hell has happened to you over the past year, but you've turned into a serious asshole. Gripping the back of the sofa, Enzo glanced at Frankie. Is this true? Yes. She dipped her chin. I'm sorry, but Marco was right. It's too dangerous for you to be anywhere near Tommaso. If you're going, I'm going. End of discussion. Enzo stood taller, though from the sweat that broke out on his upper lip, it had to hurt. Have it your way, but you'd better not get shot again. Marco shook his head. Now, can we get dressed into our Sunday best and get our asses on the plane?
Chapter 37. Frankie. My hopes for sharing a family Christmas with the Marchionnis died on the vine. Unless, of course, spending the flight to Palermo with 3 brooding men and an army of security counted as holiday festivities. We needed to strategize, to come up with a plan, to band together. However, the brothers had hardly spoken to each other since we'd left the Marchionni compound. Even Dante, who was arguably the most level-headed of the 3, remained quiet. I couldn't take the silence another moment. How's it going to work at the estate? Doesn't everyone still think we're dead?
If everything goes right, you won't be involved. Marco spoke without taking his eyes off his cell.
Then why drag us to Palermo? Dante glared.
Your plan B. Marco shoved his phone in his pocket.
I've called an emergency meeting of the Fratellanza before the ceremony. Doesn't Tommaso have to agree to that?
Enzo turned from the window.
Marco shrugged.
Not when I am making charges against him.
What charges?
Dante's seemingly perpetual frown deepened.
His men attempted to assassinate Enzo twice in the same day.
I let my head fall back against the seat.
It'll be our word against Tommaso's without evidence.
We have evidence.
Dante jumped up from his seat and walked to Marco.
Give me your laptop.
Marco handed the sleek silver machine to him.
What are you thinking?
Dante flashed me a grin.
Frankie's software pinged her when the facial recognition picked up Pasquale Puglisi outside the restaurant.
You're right. Heart pounding, I joined him at the table in the back of the main cabin. Can you access the program?
I'm not sure.
Dante's fingers flew over the keyboard. He grumbled, typed some more, and grumbled again. Finally, he let out a shout of victory.
I'm in! Here's the plan. Marco stood and paced the aisle. We split up when we land. Enzo and I will take one vehicle. Dante, you and Frankie will go in another. Once Enzo and I are inside, your driver will take you to the east side of the estate and park near the entrance to our private quarters.
Dante screen-capped shots of the alert I'd received on the streetcar and sent it to Marco's phone, along with the video of Pasquale.
I don't like it. We'll be too exposed.
If Tommaso sees us, it'll be over before it starts. It had been ages since I'd visited the Cosa Nostra's estate, but I remembered the wagon wheel layout. The common areas like the ballroom, main kitchen, and Fratellanza's conference room were in the center of the sprawling building. Each ruling family had a wing of offices and small apartments branching off like spokes. I laced my fingers with Dante's in hopes of calming our nerves. Marco's right. Tommaso's men will probably be guarding Valentina and the front entrance. They have no reason to be watching the Marchionni wing if Marco strolls through the front door.
Enzo asked,
I thought no one was allowed to bring weapons on the estate. That they'd grown up in the mob but knew so little about how things worked concerned me. Guns aren't allowed inside the common areas, but anything goes in the private wings.
Remind me why you want us to sit in the car?
Dante glared at Marco.
No one knows you're alive. I'd like to hold on to the element of surprise as long as possible.
I wasn't over the moon with the plan either, but it was the best we could do given the situation.
Relax. You'll be safe. Just stay in the car unless I text you to tell you otherwise.
Marco turned to Enzo.
You sure you want to get involved with this?
Absolutely. I can't bring my child into the world until Tommaso is dead. I hated my brother for what he'd done to my family. But the little girl inside me remembered the way he used to be, before he'd turned into a power-hungry, insecure monster. Will they execute him?
Marco shook his head. It's unlikely. Despite his best efforts, he hasn't killed Enzo, and we have nothing to tie him to Joe's murder. But I'm sure I'll have enough votes to lock him up.
Judging from the brothers' expressions, none of them believed it would be enough to stop Tommaso, and neither did I. An hour later, Dante and I sat in the back seat of an armored car, winding its way up the steep road to the estate. The higher we climbed, the faster my pulse raced until I found it difficult to catch my breath. Dante squeezed my hand. The plan is going to work. But if it doesn't, promise me you'll get the hell out of there. No. He shifted to face me. We're walking out of there together. Do you hear me? There is no way I'm leaving you behind. I should have known better than to ask, but I had to try. I'd rather submit myself to an arranged marriage than see Dante hurt, or worse. As per Marco's instructions, the driver parked on the east side of the property near the entrance to the Marchionnis' private rooms. Despite the fact a wedding was scheduled to begin in an hour or so, the estate was deserted. I leaned closer to the tinted glass to get a better view of the courtyard. I hope there are more people on the other side of the estate. Marco needs at least 3 of the 5 members to vote. They'll be here, but it's Christmas. I can't imagine any of the family members wanted to come. You're right. Movement caught my eye near the other side of the fountain. A dark-haired woman seated herself on a bench with her back to the building. I couldn't make out her features from the car, but I didn't think she was one of my sisters. 1, she was too short, and 2, her dress was a hideous shade of dog puke brown. Dante followed my gaze. Is she an Abruzzo? No. My sisters would never be caught dead in such a color. A few moments later, a man in the black fatigues of a security guard joined her. The 2 embraced and engaged in a lengthy kiss. She probably works here. I sighed and sat back. Dante continued to watch the couple. They're coming this way. What? Crap! Should we get down? I glanced from him to the floor and back. It's fine. They went inside. He half growled, half whispered. I glanced back to the couple, but they'd gone. What's wrong? Did you recognize them? I'm pretty sure that was the same guy who was in your house. I wanted to roll my eyes and point out that security guards all had the same look, but the hard set of his jaw stopped me. Did Marco let him go? He must have. Dante frowned. Frankie, that woman, it was Iris. Iris Rogers? From New Orleans? His expression grew more serious by the second. That's the one. Don't be ridiculous. What would she? My mind went blank, then flashed with too many memories too quickly, like an avalanche of thoughts all rolling downhill to one logical conclusion. She's the rat. She's the one who's been feeding Tommaso information. Nausea rolled through me, followed by a case of the shakes. Iris was my friend. I trusted her, told her about the DNA test. Sure, I hadn't mentioned names, but if she knew who I was, she would have put it together. I told her I was going to Alicudi. I told her I was meeting Giancarlo. Bile rose in my throat, and the space in the car seemed to shrink. I'm going to be sick. Dante grabbed my shoulders and ducked his head so that his face was in my line of vision. Breathe in and out. Nice and slow. Nodding, I tried to follow instructions, but I sucked in too much air and couldn't seem to exhale it. The driver's phone chirped. Sir, Mr. Marchioni's security team is on the way. He says you're needed in the meeting. That's bad, right? Something must have gone wrong. Why else would he call us inside? I glanced toward the place where Iris and her man had gone. Did they see us? Did they tell Tommaso? Still holding me, Dante gave me a little shake. We don't know it's bad. The Fratellanza may want to question us. I need you to pull it together, okay? Like you did when you pulled me out of the water. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. We'll get through this. I stared into his gorgeous eyes and wanted to believe him. Dante whispered, I'm thankful for your love and the future we planned out last night. I'd like to banish brothers knocking on the door before I had a chance to give you a couple dozen orgasms. Despite my mini freak-out session, I smiled. How could I not? I'm thankful for rain checks, and a sharp knock on the window interrupted me. Sir, we need to move.
Chapter 38, Dante. Surrounded by security, Frankie and I returned from the dead. Honestly, I would have thought there would be more fanfare. Maybe a parade, but we were met with empty halls and relative silence. She tightened her grip on my hand hard enough to break my fingers. Breathe, babe. Everything's going to be okay. Frankie stopped moving so abruptly, the guards behind her had to sidestep to avoid mowing her down. I followed her gaze to a mousy woman in a shit-colored dress. I'd invited Iris into my home, given her access to my tech and my comic collection. The mere sight of her in that place pissed me off, but my anger was nothing compared to what Frankie must have felt. Frankie? The color drained from Iris's face. She shifted her eyes back and forth without moving her head, likely looking for her armed boyfriend. I thought you were dead. She stepped out of the circle of guards and slapped Iris across the face. Sorry to disappoint you. You'll have to try harder next time. Iris's hand shot out so fast, it took me a second to realize what had happened. She'd throat-punched Frankie hard enough that she bent forward holding her neck and gasping for breath. The security team split, half with me, the other three attempting to separate the women. No easy feat, considering Frankie had pulled one of her ninja moves and taken Iris to the ground. Jacopo, come! Iris flailed on the ground but was able to get a couple of punches in. We need to go. I tried to get to them, but the guards were having none of it. Frankie pushed to her feet and took a step back, but the other woman tripped her. One of the larger members of the team picked Frankie up and slung her over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing. The bark of gunshots echoed off the polished marble floors and plaster walls, but I had no idea which direction they'd come. Frankie screamed, and the guy holding her fell to his knees. Before I could figure out if she was okay, the guy to my right wrestled me to the cold stone with the force of an Abrams tank. More shots were fired, closer than before, and the sounds of boots pounding on marble filled my ears. Stay down. The guy shifted his weight, but kept me pinned. I turned my head in the direction Frankie's guard had fallen, but couldn't see her. I had no idea if she lay dead on the other side of him or if she'd gotten away. I've been trained since birth to stay calm in these situations, not to react, to follow orders and trust my team. But nothing could have prepared me for the outright terror of possibly losing the woman I loved. Drop your weapons, or I'll kill her. A male voice cut through the chaos. Let her go, Tommaso, Marco called from somewhere to my left. Another gun was fired, and the sound of yet another body hitting the floor stopped my heart. No, Jacopo, Iris wailed. All I could think about was the traitor getting her hands on a weapon. The first person she'd come for was Frankie, and then me. I couldn't take another second. Pushing with all my strength, I managed to get the guy off me and come to my hands and knees. She is mine. Not even the Fratellenza can say otherwise. Tommaso must have done something to Frankie because she cried out. I came to my feet. Frankie in the hall, his arm around her neck, the gun jammed against her temple. My brain stuttered. The fear in her eyes tightened my throat and my fists. Some part of me knew I should be afraid, but my anger hadn't gotten the memo. Tommaso had taken my pride and my brother, but I'd be damned if I let him take my future. Our future. She met my gaze, glanced behind me, and widened her eyes. I turned to find Enzo standing beside Marco. Shit, he might as well paint bullseye on his forehead. It was difficult to tell which of the injured and dead men worked for my brother and which worked for the Abruzzos, but a quick glance told me all but one of Marco's team had fallen, and all but two of Tommaso's. It was a freaking massacre. At some point during the altercation, Sophia had entered the hallway behind Tommaso. At least, I thought it was Sophia. Her face was an absolute mess of bruises and swelling. The woman moved like a professional cat burglar. Scanning the scene, she locked gazes with me, nodded once, and turned her attention to Tommaso and Frankie. Giancarlo pushed past Marco, making himself a larger target than either of my brothers. Tell your men to stand down and allow the injured to be taken to the medical facility. He didn't bother to look at the men who'd taken bullets for him. They knew the risks when they took the job. Please, Tommaso, please help them, Iris pleaded. He ignored her. Giancarlo's voice rose. Do it before we negotiate for the girl. What do you have that I could want, Lazio? Your family is broke. Tommaso laughed. I couldn't decide if he was a little man playing a big game or if he was insane. Either way, I had to do something before he hurt Frankie. Mine isn't. Name your price. Tommaso glared. Ah, yes. I was wondering if young Romeo had the balls to stand up for his Juliet. I moved from behind the guards. What do you want? Name it. You have no power here. He tapped the gun against Frankie's head. She stared at me with tears streaming down her face. He was right. I'd never felt so damned helpless. But I had to do something. I wouldn't allow him to take her off the estate, and I wouldn't survive watching her die in front of my eyes. Neither do you, Enzo the idiot called out. I'm the eldest Abruzzo male. The seat is mine as of 5 minutes ago. Tommaso's hand tightened on his gun, moved a half-inch toward Enzo and then back to Frankie. It would have been so easy to push his buttons, to goad him into taking a shot at Enzo, to buy enough time for someone to take him out before he hurt her. And my God, did I want to, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't sacrifice one for the other. But I can sacrifice myself. I took a step forward, but Sophia shook her head. It seemed unlikely that I was the only one who'd noticed her, but no one spoke as she crouched to pick up one of the fallen guard's guns. Come on, TJ, you must want something. I spoke louder in hopes of keeping his and his remaining men's attention. Think about it. She has to be worth more alive than dead, right? Glaring, he jostled Frankie hard enough she cried out. Shut up, Marchionni. Painstakingly slow, Sophia crept closer to her siblings. What? We all know you tried to blow her up because she knew the truth about Enzo. I shrugged. The cat's out of the bag. You might as well name your price. Frankie's eyes went impossibly wide. Dante, don't. Ignoring her, he looked past me to Enzo. Your brother for my sister, Marchionni. Marco shouted. Dante doesn't have the authority to negotiate for me. I'm the capo here. And so am I. Enzo took a tentative step forward as Sophia moved into position. Let Frankie go, and you can walk out of here. Hurt her and all bets are off. Iris glanced up from her lover and shouted. Behind you! Tommaso turned, but it was too late. Sophia pressed her gun to the side of his head before he had a chance to respond. Drop it, or I'll blow what little brains you have all over this hallway. She shoved it harder against his skull. He held his arms out wide and dropped the gun. I'm surprised your husband untied you long enough to join us, little sister. Don't push me. She'd spoken like a tough girl, but the hitch in her voice told me he'd struck a nerve. Who did he force her to marry? Frankie hurried to my side and pulled me closer to the wall. She gave me a hard look that told me I would live to regret putting myself in harm's way. I drew her close, happy to take whatever punishment she chose to dole out. Are you all right? Frankie nodded and turned back to her siblings. Tell your men to put their weapons in the ground. Sophia spoke through gritted teeth. Tommaso remained silent. Not the smartest move, considering Sophia seemed ready to put a bullet in his head. Do it before I lose my patience. She tapped his temple with the barrel. Tommaso swallowed hard. Lower your weapons. His men knelt and set their rifles on the slick marble. Marco and Giancarlo motioned for their men to move in. Sophia nodded to Iris. And get her out of my sight. Once the security team had removed the injured and Iris, Marco blew out a breath. What do we do with Tommaso? Giancarlo folded his arms. Lock him and his men up until the Fratellanza decides what to do with him. Before you do that, Tommaso has something to tell you. Sophia leaned close and whispered something to her brother. Whatever she'd said seemed to rattle him because he went wide-eyed and the color drained from his face. Tell them. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice rose in pitch and volume. Sophia glanced at Frankie, looked down Tommaso's body and back at her sister. Want to help me out? I'd love to. Frankie scooped up a discarded gun and aimed it at Tommaso's crotch. Tell them what you did. He smirked. You don't have the guts. Oh, I have the guts. She fired a shot to his right. But my aim sucks. I wonder how many times I'll have to shoot you before I manage to hit that tiny dick of yours. I didn't know whether to be proud or horrified. I went with pride. For a woman who'd damn near fallen apart in the car, she was doing a fine job holding herself together. Frankie moved closer and made a show of aiming the gun at Abruzzo's family jewels. He made a strangled sound. Okay. I rigged Joe Marchioni's SUV. Sophia wasn't involved. Frankie lowered the gun. Giancarlo motioned for his men to take Tommaso from Sophia. Marco, it is your right to demand retribution when other capos meet. I want him dead. Marco nodded in agreement. Sophia surprised me when she shook her head. No, death is too easy for a man who sold his own sister to a monster. I want him locked up for the rest of his life. Marco's expression softened. You heard the lady? Get him out of here. Frankie rushed to her sister. What happened? Do you need a doctor? Sophia choked back a sob. The wedding. Valentina wasn't the bride. I was. Michele Salvo. He is my husband. No, Soph. It can't be legal. We'll get it annulled. I swear it. Frankie pulled her into an embrace. Giancarlo cursed under his breath before moving to the sisters. He lifted Sophia's face and inspected her bruises. Salvo did this to you? She nodded and looked away. I will make him pay. The tenderness in his tone made me wonder if he'd offered to marry the wrong sister. After all, he had stood up for Sophia at the airport. Not my circus, not my monkeys. I glanced back to Enzo and Marco. Are we done here? I, for one, want to spend what's left of Christmas with family. I need to make some calls, but we should make it home before midnight. Marco stared at the dead as if memorizing their faces, turned, and strode into one of the Marchionni offices. He'd been a borderline ass since the business with Tommaso had started, but there, in that hallway, I got it. Marco had men's lives in his hands, men with wives and children counting on them. He'd never wanted to be the capo, but he'd stepped up and taken on more responsibility than any one man should have to bear. Giancarlo, I believe you have something of ours. Frankie gave him a watery smile. Ah, yes. Mia and Ariana. They are waiting in my quarters. He shoved his hands in his pockets. Perhaps it is better to meet them there. Sophia said, Valentina is here as well. She's in Tommaso's office. One glance, and I could all but read Frankie's mind. She wanted to be with her sisters. Rather than spend the night and risk dealing with more mob politics, I offered an alternative solution. Why not come back to Comiso with us? All of you. There's a wedding on New Year's Eve. I'm sure we can find room for everyone. Sophia glanced between Frankie and me. You're getting married? Not yet. It's Leo's turn. I slid my arm around Frankie's shoulders. But you should know, I fully intend to marry your sister one day. Her expression went from surprise to amused and settled on resigned. That's wonderful news. I'll see you both when you return to New Orleans. Enzo made his way over. Sophia, please come with us tonight. I'd like to introduce all of my new sisters to my wife. She winced. Shauna and I have met before. I don't think she'll be happy to see me. Then we will share the doghouse together. He chuckled, winced, and pressed his hand to his side. Come, spend the rest of the holiday season with your family. Sophia didn't seem convinced. Are you sure? I did try to poison. I believe Romeo and Juliet over there have put an end to the Abruzzo-Marchionni feud. He nodded to Frankie and I. Besides, I'm sure somewhere along the line a Marchionni ancestor knocked off an Abruzzo or two. It's time we stopped keeping score. A slow smile crossed her face. I agree. And just like that, I added more items to my list of things I was thankful for. 5 new sisters.
Chapter 39. Frankie. It turned out we missed Christmas with the Marchionnis, but no one seemed to mind we were a day off. Evelyn had created a second feast and had somehow managed to have gifts under the tree for me and my sisters. Even Giancarlo had a small package to open. I don't know how he pulled it off, but Dante had given me exactly what I wanted. A family. And not just his. We'd somehow managed to blend ours together. Even Sophia. Dante and I walked to the guest house after dinner, and I was ready for some alone time with my man. We'd just settled in to watch a holiday movie when Mia walked into the living room. Sorry to interrupt, but can we talk for a moment? Between her fidgeting and tight smile, she made me nervous. He motioned to the chair beside us. Don't take it personally if I fall asleep. I'm suffering from turkey coma. He ate twice as much to make up for Thanksgiving, I explained, but I was sure Mia had no idea what I was talking about. She plopped down. Your mother outdid herself. I can't thank you and your family enough for welcoming us into your home. Anything for Frankie. He kissed the top of my head. I half expected her to make a snarky comment or roll her eyes, but she didn't. In fact, her smile wilted. Mia drew a deep breath. I owe you both an apology. I was rude when we met on Giancarlo's yacht. Sitting up straighter, I nodded for her to continue. A month ago, I would have let her off the hook, told her not to worry about it, and changed the subject. But I wasn't the same anxious girl I was before. Dante had taught me that the best relationships involved give and take, and I wanted that with all of my sisters. I was so angry at Tommaso, she sighed, and myself. It was easier to blame you for failing us than to admit I'd done nothing to help our situation. I reached forward and squeezed her hand. You kept Ari and Valentina sane for months. That's more than I could have done. Her cheeks reddened. And I was mad at you for falling for the enemy. Dante coughed to cover a laugh. In my defense, I didn't know you. She bit her lower lip. I was raised to believe that your family was self-centered, backstabbing ass. We get it, I laughed. She stood. Anyway, I just wanted to apologize and tell you that I'm happy for you. Thanks, Mia. I had no idea what she and my other sister would do now, but I secretly hoped they'd come to New Orleans, to visit anyway. That means a lot. He tugged me back to his side, to both of us. I waited until she left the room before hitting the play button on the remote. The opening credits to It's a Wonderful Life began to play when Zach came through the front door without knocking. He took in the scene and blushed. Sorry to disturb your Netflix and chill, but Papa Joe wants to speak to the two of you. Dante eased away from me. Is he okay? He's good. Weirdly, he seems better than he has in weeks. Zach shrugged. Must be something to do with all of the beautiful women in the house. That, I don't doubt. Dante pulled me to my feet. Where is he? By the pool. He said you guys should come alone. The teen plopped down, scooped up our popcorn, and grabbed the remote. By all means, make yourself at home. Chuckling, Dante led me to the door. We walked hand in hand around the main house to the pool. I wonder what he wants to talk to us about. My curiosity was getting the better of me, but for once, I didn't assume the worst. Knowing my father, it's hard to say. Dante opened a wrought iron gate and waited until I went inside. Papa Joe turned as we approached. Thank you for coming. I know it's been a long couple of days. Of course. I looked at him, really looked, for the first time since I'd arrived. While Giuseppe Marchionni was about the same age as my father was before he died, he seemed ancient. His skin had a crepe paper quality to it, and his hair had gone mostly gray. However, he had a fire in his eyes that reminded me of his youngest son. You sure you don't want to go inside where it's warm? Dante nodded to the sliding glass doors. In that madhouse? Let's talk in the garden. He motioned to the wheelchair. Frankie, would you mind? Sure. I exchanged quick glances with Dante as I pushed his father along the walkway. Dante shrugged and pointed to the left. This way. I rounded the corner and stopped to admire one of the most beautiful views on Sicily. A full moon hung heavy in the night sky. From the height of the terrace, I could see lights from boats bobbing on the water, as well as the warm yellow glow of the city below. It is beautiful. I understand why you didn't want to go in the house. My family has lived on this land since before the Normans invaded. Papa Joe coughed the sort of cough that came from the depths of his lungs. Dante rested his hand on his father's shoulder. Are you sure it's a good idea to be out here, Pops? Gasping to catch his breath, He motioned to a couple of empty chairs.
I would sleep under the olive trees if your mother would let me.
Dante and I seated ourselves. While I couldn't speak for him, I was more than a little eager to hear what he had to say.
Your father was a good man.
He took my hand.
He and I went to school together. We were the best of friends, like brothers. Did you know that?
The news surprised me. My dad had rarely spoken of the Marchionnis, but when he had, he'd done so through gritted teeth. No, sir. Papa Joe gazed out over the water.
He never forgave me for marrying Evelyn.
Why? Dante asked. His father gave him a less than patient look.
Why do you think, son?
Dante's eyes widened. Oh. He shook his head.
None of that matters anymore. What you need to know is your father was right. My stubbornness caused the feud between our families.
I couldn't help but smile. My dad was pretty stubborn, too. I'm sure he didn't help the situation. Papa Joe chuckled.
No, I don't suppose he did.
Dante drew a deep breath.
Pops, Frankie and I have put the feud behind us. Yes, but it has caused a lot of bloodshed. I want to be sure mine and Abruzzo's mistakes don't cause any more pain.
Dante and I exchanged glances. I wasn't sure how much Marco had told his father, but he was partially right. People had lost their lives, but I blamed Tommaso more than a feud between the older generation.
Enzo is not my son by blood, but he is as much a Marchionni as I am. But you two already knew that.
My chest tightened, and Dante's eyes went wide. That's why he blames himself for the rift between him and my dad. Was Evelyn's affair some sort of revenge? We did. I had a DNA test run back in New Orleans. That I'd managed to keep my voice smooth was a minor miracle.
I heard.
He chuckled and turned to his son.
This girl is as smart as she is beautiful. She's a keeper. You should marry her before I die.
Dante ran his hand over the back of his neck. I'll see what I can do. But we're a little young.
Your mother and I were younger when we married.
Papa Joe suffered another coughing fit. When he calmed, he motioned to Dante.
Don't blame your mother for what happened. I wasn't her first choice in husbands. She was in love with Abruzzo when we married.
Dante frowned.
Pops, let me finish.
He paused to catch his breath.
Back then, we didn't have a say in who we married, and love didn't have anything to do with it.
I understand. Dante sighed the heavy sigh of a man with too many secrets. And I don't blame her.
Good.
He glanced between us.
I asked you two here to give you my blessing. I have welcomed 5 daughters-in-law into this family, and I would be honored to welcome you.
Dante stared slack-jawed. I felt as if my blood had turned to helium, like I could will myself to float away, past the exosphere and into space. Thank you. Papa Joe reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box.
This was my mother's ring. It would mean a lot to me and Evelyn if you wore it one day.
Dante's eyebrows climbed into his hairline.
Pops, isn't this my job?
He flubbed his lips.
Why wait? I need to know the feud is over before I leave this earth.
Smiling, I glanced between them. While I was in no hurry to rush to the altar with Dante, we'd all but promised each other we'd end up there eventually. Papa Joe touched my cheek.
When he is old and bored of video games, my son will give this to you.
I would like that very much. I didn't dare touch the box, but I was dying to see what was inside.
Was that a yes?
Dante's smile made everything seem possible. Of course it is. But I'd like a real proposal one day, in the future, when you're ready.
My work here is done. Papa Joe tossed Dante the box. Now one of you push me inside before Evelyn realizes I'm missing.
Chapter 40. Dante. I'd stood at the front of the church and watched 4 of my brothers tie the knot, and each time was the same. We'd spend the hours before the ceremony stuffing our faces, talking the groom off the ledge, and make it to the altar in the nick of time. The ceremonies always lasted for freaking ever, and by the time they were over, my knees would hurt from all the kneeling. However, once the reception had started, all of the nerves, second thoughts, and mishaps were forgotten. Leo and Dahlia's day was no different. Unless you counted the 4-year-old ring bearer using his Batman whisper to provide comedic relief through the entire affair. I love that kid. There was another thing that was different. Me. I'd changed since I'd dressed up in more makeup than a drag queen and met my very own Harley Quinn. Before Frankie, I'd been the guy who was more comfortable behind a screen than in the world. What can I say? Her crazy like to dance the tango with my crazy. Yeah, okay. She completes me. Sipping a glass of champagne, I stood on the side of the dance floor watching Gunnar charm the socks off my soon-to-be fiancée and her sisters. The little guy had serious moves. My mother joined me. Without taking her eyes off of Frankie and Gunnar, she said, "Your father told me about your conversation." I turned and gave her my full attention. He gave me Nonna Marchioni's ring. It was my idea. She smiled the smile she usually reserved for her grandchildren. I hated to poke the bear and get into a topic that could lead to drama, but I needed to know the truth. What is it about her? What makes her different from Maggie or Shauna, or even Nico? She hesitated as if trying to gather her thoughts. I loved her father, Pops told me. The conversation should have bugged me, but it didn't. I can't imagine being forced to marry someone while I was in love with another. It was a different time. Ma studied my face for a long moment. As for my feelings about you and Francesca, I know you. You're not like your brothers. You waited to fall in love, and when you did, you fell hard. You two belong together. My throat tightened. Thanks, Ma. She patted my face. Don't wait too long to make it official. We can't have your brothers thinking I'm playing favorites. Aren't you? Shh. She laughed and strolled away. I turned back to Frankie and caught her doing something close to the twist with the 2-year-old. She was absolutely stunning in her pale pink dress, but her beauty went far below the surface. She was by far the smartest, kindest, and most badass woman I'd ever met. I couldn't wait to officially make her mine. Frankie threw her head back and laughed, as if she didn't have a care in the world. Surrounded by her sisters and my family, maybe she didn't. Or maybe her new carefree attitude had something to do with me. I hoped it did anyway. Enzo walked to my side and put his hand on my shoulder. She's something special. I was just thinking the same thing. I could feel the weight of my grandmother's ring in my pocket. I'd carried it around the entire day, waiting for the perfect moment to give it to her, but my nerves were getting the better of me. Sure, she'd already said yes, but we'd talked getting hitched one day in the distant future. That future seemed galaxies away, and I was more than ready to take the relationship into hyperdrive. I'd ask where your head is, but it's obvious. He gave me a little shake. I turned to him, my brother, and it hit me. With Frankie's father gone, Enzo was the guy I needed to talk to. It amused me that even the time-honored tradition of asking for a woman's hand in marriage was somehow screwy thanks to the mob. Something wrong? You look a little pale. Grinning like an idiot, I said, You're her older brother. Yeah, we've established that. The confused look on his face had me on the verge of laughter. May I marry your sister? He opened his mouth, snapped it shut, and barked out a laugh. Only if she agrees, and we don't have to discuss dowries and terms. Deal. I shook his hand for good measure. I hate to change the subject, but... Enzo motioned to the side of the courtyard. Can I talk to you and Frankie a minute? Sure, be right there. I walked to the dance floor and pulled Frankie from the clutches of my nephew's cuteness. Or tried to. No, Frankie's mine. He folded his arms and stomped his foot. She knelt in front of him. I'll be right back. Promise. Ariana took Gunner's chubby little hand. Will you dance with me instead? The kiddo forgot all about Frank and held his arms up to the tall brunette. Frankie pulled me close and brushed her lips across mine. I'm thinking we need a son and a daughter. Is that right? I trailed my hand down her back to her ass. She pressed against me. Mm-hmm. In fact, why don't we slip away and start practicing? As much as I would love that, Enzo needs to speak to us. At the mention of his name, her smile brightened. What about? No clue, but let's make it quick. I followed her to the edge of the deck. Enzo wasted no time with small talk. I don't plan to stay in Sicily. Nodding, I waited for him to continue. He drew a breath. I'm planning to name Sofia as the new Abruzzo capo, once she gets things cleared up between her and Salvo. Frankie frowned. I don't think he'll give her any trouble. Me either. I couldn't help but cringe. After the gunfight ended in Palermo, Giancarlo's men had found Michele Salvo in his office, tied up, gagged, and, let's just say, Sofia had taught him a lesson or two about the consequences of hurting women. While there was some debate over the legalities of their marriage, I highly doubted Salvo would contest a divorce. Enzo ran his hand over the back of his neck. Right. But do you think she wants the position? I think you're asking the wrong person. I clamped a hand on his shoulder. But you might run into some trouble getting the approval of the Fratellanza. There's never been a female capo. Marco and Giancarlo will vote on her side. As you said, Salvo is afraid of her. That leaves Ricci. The position is hers if she wants it. I nodded again and glanced at Frankie for backup. She rolled her lips in and glanced away, a sure sign she didn't care for this conversation. Enzo drew a deep breath. I would rather end all Abruzzo ties to the Cosa Nostra than give my sisters a new life. That would be my preference. I couldn't help but smile every time he mentioned his new siblings. He seemed to be taking his role as big brother seriously, other than the dowry comment. Mine too. Absolutely. Frankie's voice rose. Don't ask her. Just do that. He cringed. Right, but Sofia is a little scary, I added. To say the least. He dipped his chin and chuckled. Frankie rolled her eyes. She's not that bad. Easy for you to say. Talk to her. I doubt she's up for holding another brother at gunpoint so soon. I glanced over and caught Sofia staring. I think she knows we're talking about her. Frankie waved her fingers and made ghost sounds. Better watch it, or she'll give you the evil eye. Seriously? He glanced between us. I remember hearing something about Nonna Abruzzo being a witch. She didn't miss a beat. And I remember something about the Marchionnis selling their souls to the devil in exchange for good looks and endless money. I slid my arm around her. A witch and a soulless but rich GQ model. I knew we were perfect for each other. Glancing at Sofia, Enzo pulled his collar away from his neck. Might as well do it now, while there are witnesses. Frankie groaned. Just talk to her. If that's it, we have things to do. He shook his head. Not so fast. I need you two to stay put. Why do we have to be a part of this? I hated to admit it, but I was enjoying seeing him squirm. Sofia walked over, glanced between us, and pursed her lips. What are you three plotting? I waited for Enzo to answer. When it became crystal clear he was leaving it up to me, I blurted out the first thing that popped into my brain. Do you want to be capo? Sofia laughed. Nope, I am done with all things mafia. Frankie blew out a breath. Thank God. Then you will have no problem with me removing the Abruzzos from the Cosa Nostra? Enzo asked. There are some business dealings that will need to be handled. It will take some time, but no, I think that is for the best. She turned to me. Any chance you'll hire me to work for your new company? All of that nervous energy Enzo had felt moments before shifted to me. I didn't know how to respond. Do you know anything about computers? Frankie covered her mouth, likely to hide her smile. Nothing. Sofia flashed me a wicked grin that told me I was going to need human resources paperwork sooner than I imagined. But I know quite a bit about security. Why not branch out and offer bodyguards, along with the IT mumbo-jumbo? The mumbo-jumbo comment aside, it wasn't a bad idea. You might be onto something. Write up a proposal outlining how you'd envision it working, and we'll talk. Frankie said, I'll help. I have some ideas. I had the feeling they'd played me, but I didn't care as long as they were happy and the company stayed afloat. You're going to make an awesome husband one day. Sophia pinched my cheek. Rubbing my face, I said, Thanks, but I'm putting a no cheek-pinching clause in your contract. Frankie caught my eye and mouthed, Thank you. I winked. Yep, I'd been played. Sophia leaned closer to Enzo. Who is that man talking to Shauna? Jackson Landry. He's a longtime friend of hers. Enzo waited for her to turn and study Jack before he gave me a, what the hell was that about look. Does he live in New Orleans? She spoke without taking her eyes off Jackson. He does. Enzo nudged her side. And he's single. Frankie lowered her voice. All the more reason to come back to New Orleans with us. Indeed. Sophia grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and sauntered over to Shauna and Jack. Landry isn't going to know what hit him. I slung my arm around Frankie. Maybe not, but he'll die with a smile on his face. She nuzzled closer. On that note, I'm going to dance with my wife. Enzo walked away. Frankie batted her lashes at me. Can we go back to the guest house now? Actually, come with me to the garden. There's something I want to ask you. She pushed out her lower lip but tightened her grip on my arm. We'd taken 3 steps when Gabe stopped us. Holding a sleeping son in his arms, he whispered, I sent a small fortune to the couple who helped you on Alacuti. Tino and Maria? Wide-eyed, Frankie glanced between us. Did someone else help us on Alacuti? I winked at her before speaking to Gabe. Thanks. I appreciate your help. Anytime. He glanced at Rocco. I'm going to put this one to bed. He's all partied out. I'd hoped to whisk her away someplace quiet, make my speech, put the ring on her finger, and celebrate with my family. All of my family. You're coming back, right? It's almost midnight. Gabe made a production about yawning. I'm beat. Plus, it'll be too loud out here to hear the baby monitor over the fireworks. Oh, I forgot about the display my parents had planned. A new plan began to form. Sure, I'd likely steal some of the bride and groom's thunder, but Dahlia wouldn't care, and Leah would get over it. I glanced at the time on my phone. Give me 5 minutes. Gabe lowered his brows. Whatever you're going to do, better be worth traumatizing my son with fireworks. What's going on? Frankie folded her arms. You'll see. I half dragged her to the front of the dance floor and waved my arms like an idiot to get the band leader's attention. Dante, what are you doing? Her voice shook. No big surprise. She had to know what was about to happen. The music quieted, and I dropped to one knee. Frankie glanced at the friends and family surrounding us before finally settling on me. Funny, I'd watched my self-confident brothers fall to pieces when they'd proposed, but I didn't feel a single ounce of nerves. I was the shy, awkward one of the bunch, but I was absolutely sure I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I took her hands in mine. Frankie, I thought I was in love with you that first night when you showed up in pleather pants and quoted my favorite villain. But I was wrong. It wasn't when you pulled your ninja moves and laid me out in your cubicle, or when you kicked my butt at video games, or even seeing you dressed in a metal bikini. A slow smile spread across her face, and she shook her head. My family laughed and whispered behind me, but I ignored them. I fell in love with you before we met, and each day since, I've fallen harder and faster. I pulled the velvet box from my pocket and took a breath to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Ask her! Zach shouted from the edge of the crowd. Yeah, that might help. Smiling up at her, I whispered, Will you marry me? Yes. Frankie threw herself in my arms so fast our heads collided. We parted, laughed, and finally sealed the deal with a kiss as the first of the fireworks exploded in the night sky. Pressing her brow to mine, she laughed. But we might need to add crash helmets to our wedding registry. You've been listening to Gin and Trouble, a mafia romantic comedy, Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 5, written by Kathryn M. Hearst, narrated by Virginia Rose and Aaron Shedlock, produced by Bookworm Audio, post-production services provided by Eric Sinestvet, text copyright 2020 by Kathryn M. Hearst, production copyright 2021 by Kathryn M. Hearst, all rights reserved. Thanks for listening.